Hi guys, and welcome to this video of the Minox ML and its partial disassembly, covering a couple of faults and rectifications and what have you. Now, please note that this video is not a tutorial per se. This is a sort of explore and investigate as I do so situation, but it might be useful to some of you people who have some of the Minox 35 cameras and have some of the various problems that these have. I'm hoping to do one covering the shutter button adjustment, although mine at the moment is behaving, but I will cover a little bit about that in the video. So it's a bit of a long video. It was going to be a very brief one, but that kind of spiraled out of control for reasons that you will see as you get into it. And at the end of the video, I will show some sample photos that I took from my test roll. Enjoy. Hi all, it's been quite a while since I've uploaded anything to my YouTube. In front of me here I've got a Minox ML, which those of you that know these cameras will know they're a very compact 35mm zone focusing viewfinder camera, and all electronic, and they are notorious for having bad shutters. And this one I would say is no exception, but it actually is. This is the first. I've had 1ml, 2 GTs and a Russian Kiev clone in the past, and every single one of them has had a shutter that was inoperative, and they got moved on way back when because I just wasn't really into trying to figure them out at the time. I had other cameras to play with and what have you, but I've been hankering after an ML for a long time ever since, and I happened across this one recently. Much to my surprise, when I actually fitted a battery and tried it, the shutter worked, and it does work, but it's a little bit intermittent, so that does need addressing a little bit. However, as I've been sat there just watching watching a movie and playing with the camera, just winding and firing it and trying different things and trying to figure out when it's being particularly awkward, I found that one of the things that helps is leaving the shutter cocked, which is something that kind of goes against my preference. There are some cameras where you don't have an option. The Minox sub-miniatures are one example of those. Because of the very nature and the way that they open and close, the shutter has to be cocked. And also the Rollei 35 range, because the shutter has to be cocked to unlock and close the lens assembly. So I can live with that. I'm just not a huge fan of leaving shutters cocked with springs under tension if I don't have to. However, while I was playing with this, I noticed, completely out of the blue, that the aperture ring suddenly wouldn't go past 8 or just over 5.6, between 5.6 and 8. So it felt and looked like a mechanical problem. And just to kind of show you the innards without hopefully losing anything, this white piece that you see there is the bit that slides as you turn the aperture ring. I can't do that at the moment because this is actually already disassembled. I've just kind of put this back together like this to show you the disassembly procedure and the cause of that problem. So to take off the focusing ring, I set this to infinity and loosened the 3 screws. You have to kind of turn it and loosen. There's one down here, one down here. You have to loosen those first, and then there's one up here. So you've kind of got 3 equidistant from each other. So the one up here I left till last, so that I was able to set that to infinity, and then just lift that away like so. And the screws, which you can see are just there like so. That has a little glass window in, which is the window to the CDS sensor, which you also see there. So bear that in mind, don't lose that. Next thing you need to do is remove this to get down underneath it, and to do that you've actually got to remove the front lens. This was quite handy in a way because there are some very slight evidence of fungus in the edges of the elements, but they're inside the elements. So what I did there, as you can see, apologies for the jittery camera, I'll try and hold that steady. What I did there is I put a Sharpie mark and started to unscrew this lens, and it transpires that it takes approximately, try not to touch that and rub it off, it takes just over one full turn anti-clockwise. I'm just going to bear with me, I'm just going to do that. So okay, so the mark's still there. So that's one full turn, which hopefully you can just about see with the mark on there. And then just a little further and it will actually lift clean off like so. Now I am going to set the infinity on this before I fasten everything back down, but this will give me a good starting point. If you're not familiar with collimating lenses, you might be as well off marking that as best you can for reassembly, but be aware that it might be out a little. Underneath this next are 3 screws. Those 3 screws down there, the brass one with a little pin goes in the furthest, I'm going to pointy tweezers, goes in the furthest screw slot there, and then the other 2 are these small standard blade screws, at which point this will lift away. It won't lift away with that other lens in front of it, it will block it, but this will lift away, and this only goes in one position. This is the bit that that has the hyperfocal distancing marks on. So that only goes in one position, lift away like so. And then upon lifting this away, the problem, the thing that was causing my f-stop problem and stopping it going right the way around was actually this screw here, which infuriatingly has actually fallen back into the slot when I wanted to show where it originally was. Let me pull that back out. But essentially it had come out and it was just kind of floating adrift in there like that. And this is obviously what has created a physical stop for that aperture closing, and it wouldn't go past about f8 at the maximum. And while you could use it like this, of course, it's far from ideal. So obviously the fix for this is to fasten that back in. Now, while I had this lens out, I've cleaned that lens. I need to clean it again because I've been handling it now. So I've cleaned that one inside and out, and I've cleaned the outside of this one. However, you can probably make out on the video that the little fungal spore path is behind that lens. So I think I am going to have to remove this ring here, which is what does this bit do? Oh yeah, this is the aperture ring. Sorry, silly me. This is the aperture ring, and as you turn that, it will, as you can see, close the aperture and open the aperture there. The shutters behind it are closed. So I suspect that I will have to remove this and possibly remove those screws anyway to lift that off so I can clean behind that lens, but we'll see how that goes. So there's the aperture ring removed. This just lifted clean away, and obviously you can see the window, which is kind of like a cellulose film with shading on. There's actually a mark on there which I've tried to clean off, which you can see in rather unsuccessfully, and it's kind of scored that a little bit, so I don't want to rub at that too much. That was just with a Q-tip and isopropyl alcohol, but I don't want to do that too much. And obviously you can see a little attachment there, so I need to make sure that I put this back in the position I took it off, and I took it off with the program auto exposure at the arrow mark, so I need to make sure it goes back in the same way. Also just there you'll see a little piece of white bent plastic that fits in that little slot that you can see right there, and it's essentially just a little bit of a friction ring. It looks like it's something like Delrin or something like that. But you can also see how sloppy that plate is at the same time, which shows that that other screw is slightly loose anyway, which is rather a nuisance. But anyway, I'm going to take that off now, and hopefully take this off without lots of parts pinging everywhere, and clean the inside of that lens. Worth quickly noting just here, that spring that you can see there bends when it's fitted back in place. When it's fitted back in place, it bends around that screw that it's behind, and then hooks behind this one here. And this is the one that opens and closes the aperture. And this acts as a third fastener as well. So a pair of sturdy tweezers on the flats to get that starting to turn, and then I shall be able to remove this brass plate. Thankfully, there was no pinging, no things flying off into oblivion, no hidden springs or anything, which is always good. That is the underside of that, and which means I can now clean that lens. I can actually get a cotton swab some isopropyl alcohol in there, give that a good clean. It's possibly not the best way to clean them. There is a way of doing it with hydrogen peroxide, some great videos on YouTube about that, but that's not something I have the sort of time to mess about with doing at the moment. I just want to kind of get this back together working and go and run a roll of film through it and see how it works. But there you can actually see how the aperture blades work. It's kind of like a crab claw, if you will. Let's see if I can do this like so. And because of the shape of them, you can see, try not to knock those out of place, oops, which I've done. You can see that it doesn't actually close perfectly evenly, and it's obviously just two blades, so it makes a sort of a diamond shape rather than having an iris like you would see typically in a lens, similar to the Olympus XA in operation. So that's the aperture blades. So now I'm going to clean this lens and get this back together. I don't want to take any more than this off. Obviously behind that plate is the shutter assembly, which are 3 shutter leaves, but I don't want to go any further into this. So at the moment I'm just going to clean that lens and reassemble. So much to my dismay and disappointment, it looks like that might actually be a pair of lenses. Possibly bonded in place. I can't see any other means of them being fastened, and I don't want to go digging too much. Unfortunately, the tracks of where the fungus have gotten hold, it's not horrendous, but it is there and it's obvious, as you can see if I flick that sort of in the light. So it shouldn't have too much of a massive impact on the photos, but at this moment in time I don't know how I can separate those lenses. I've cleaned both sides of this, and I don't know of any way that I can separate that to clean in between them as yet. So that will just have to stay as is. Here we are with this plate back in place, and while this is on, I'm going to show you, it's quite funny that I'd said this is going to be a quick and dirty video, and it was, because my intention was just literally to show you that loose screw. I was going to refit it and put it back together, and then in true fashion I decided to get a bit more inquisitive and start poking around a bit further, and obviously everything else happened. But while we're here with this back together, this will be able to demonstrate better the aperture operation now that that spring's back in place. So you can see as that's pushed in by the plastic ring on that, it will close up the aperture, and you can see because of the shape of those aperture blades, it's not even right the way across. It's kind of like a lobster claw shape. So until it closes right down, you get a sort of odd shape. So it's interesting. Not that it matters, because these are a renowned lens for their clarity and sharpness. So, but just an interesting curiosity. So anyway, I've tightened those up, and next thing is to replace the aperture ring. At a very slightly nerve-wracking moment replacing the aperture ring, because it didn't want to seat down initially. I had to use a tiny screwdriver to pry the aperture pin, the one that I was demonstrating the blades working, inside there, because that didn't want to sit inside there to begin with. So, and then it took a little bit of wiggling to actually get this to seat flush with where that arrow mark is pointing there. But you can see now we've got a full range right the way through to F16, so that's operational again. A very quick view of that little plastic shim, the Delrin or whatever material it is, so you can see how that sits. And that actually, whoops, it's just fallen over, but that presses down into that slot and provides a bit of friction which holds the aperture ring in place. Okay, so it's the following day, and this very quick video is turning into something of an epic, as it turns out. So we got the whole lenses reassembled, as you can see there, but I discovered another problem. I suddenly had a problem when adjusting the apertures again, and it transpires that at some point this little slidey piece here, which I know works to lock that into the program aperture priority mode, and then slides along in that direction as you go down the apertures to the smaller ones, has become disengaged. And then it became apparent as I started disassembling some of this to see if I could fix that and slot it back into place. And the answer to that was not easily without disturbing other things I didn't want to disturb. And then I realized that the funny shaped aperture ring with the protrusions somehow slots into this. So what I'm going to have to do now is disassemble the front again and then try and realign that and reseat that, and then realign the aperture control ring. Then hopefully we'll be able to get back to working condition again. Okay, the good news is that wasn't quite as painful as I anticipated it to be to realign that. It's just a case of doing a little bit of jiggling, holding the camera at a specific angle, and wiggling everything into place, for which you could do with about 5 hands maybe, but it's manageable with a little bit of cursing and swearing. So this is going to be a little bit tricky because I'm still on handheld wobbly cam on my phone, but I'm going to try and show you what went on there. So obviously I stripped all this, removed this. This is the one with the plastic piece that goes down inside the lens, and that's what engages with that white piece. So I'm going to try and show you. It's very important, as I discovered just a moment ago while I was trying to film the demonstration of this working, that we don't close the camera door at this point. So let me get the focus onto there so you can see what we're doing. So we can see now that I can fully rotate the aperture ring right the way through the full range of apertures, including the P program auto mode. That's not secured down at the moment, so I want to be very careful with this. And hopefully you can see the white part there. I'm going to try and move the light down. I'm trying to hold this in such a manner that will enable you to see. I'm trying to hold this from the top so you can see the operation. As I turn that slightly to the right, there's a little pin that drops out of that slot that you can just see there, like so. Okay, I need to bring that in a bit closer, yeah, like that. And that's on a spring-loaded switch. So that's obviously what changes the settings regarding the program auto mode. And it then rotates around like that. What was happening was, because this wasn't locked fully up to the back of the lens housing, the white plastic piece was dropping down and then catching on there, so it was sticking at around F16, F11, and I couldn't turn it back without a bit of shaking and jiggling with the camera facing upwards, obviously, which is less than ideal. But now, as you can see, that's rotating smoothly. The parts that you could see previously actually engage with this white plastic sliding piece and press it into place at the back of this housing, and obviously it had fallen out of place a little bit. So to refit it, what I had to do was hold it in this position and use a pair of bent tip tweezers to sort of jiggle it right back and up against this piece as far as I could, and while holding it in that position, wiggle this front piece on, which took a little bit of dexterity, but it's manageable and it's doable. Hopefully that's clear enough for you to see what's going on. I know it's tricky. I mean, I would like to show you it actually being fitted into place. I just don't have the number of hands required to do that, I'm afraid. So that's now in place. I can refasten the lens back together. We're on the final stage of the reassembly of the lens now, and I'm going to show you my homebrewed redneck collimation setup, which I've used on several cameras just to get a rough idea, and it's generally good enough. I mean, you can get more technical. You can get another lens matched up with pointing at this one, and you yeah, anyway, it gets very technical. I'm not even going to go into that, and that's something I will try at some point because it would be useful to have a setup like that. But what I do is I use a bright day like today is, and something contrasty outdoors, or at night time and a street light in the distance, which seems to work quite well as well, or some other bright light at a distance that will equate to infinity focus. And then once everything's tightened down, I will test the other focuses with a lamp at a known measured distances to see how that correlates. Because this particular camera is an electronic shutter, the longest shutter opening is, I think, 1/2 second or 1 second, which is not long enough to be useful. You have to force the camera to leave the shutter open. To do that with the Minox cameras, the way to do that is to set, you'll see that's wide open at the moment, is to set the ISO as low as possible, point the lens somewhere dark, and press the shutter, which will fire and open the shutter, and then as quickly as possible pull the battery out of the battery housing, which you can see there. Obviously on the other Minox cameras it's a screw thread, so the way to do those is not to screw it all the way in, is to have it so it's kind of held in place, fire the shutter, and then pop that out and drop the battery out as quickly as you can, and that will leave the shutter locked open like so, allowing you to do what you need to do. With that shutter locked open and focused on your target, which is essentially something bright and contrasty in the distance that you know would be at infinity focus. In my case, I've got a bright white house right the way across the road and up the road a wee bit against dark green foliage, which is perfect for this. And then you can turn this to achieve your desired focus. Once the desired focus is achieved, which you'll see is very close to the marks that I made, and in this case would probably have sufficed if I'd just realigned the marks, and then I can set that ring, ensuring that the infinity focus is smack in the middle of that little red doodad there, and tighten these screws down, and that little nubbin there goes into this slot here and limits the amount of travel, so it will stop at infinity, it will stop at 3 feet. Once this is in place, I can actually do a test against a light which is measured at a known distance to check that the focus at the shorter distances is accurate as well. For the ground glass in inverted commas, I use a piece of baking paper or baking parchment, whatever you want to call it, usually taped down. In this case, I was able to actually hold it on both sides, a thumb on each side holding it, and using these fingers focus the lens to achieve the desired sharp focus against this while looking directly through it. Now, as you can see, Obviously this is not held flat, so this is not going to reflect accurately, but you can see that's my light, which is there, and you can see that that will show on present on this paper, which acts like a ground glass. So at that point, this will get you sort of close enough ballpark, and if you need to adjust it back or forth a little bit, you can just retry again, sort of rinse and repeat as necessary. And as you can see there, that black mark I made when I disassembled this, and you can see the little indent where the grub screw sort of bit into that. And that's fairly close, so I'm going to reassemble this at that and then test the short distances and see where we're at. The only things left to do are to fit the light cone, which goes inside, whoops, trying to hold that steady, which goes inside here and just snaps in. That's easiest to fit with the film, with the lens door closed. This is then pushed back flush with the film plane, and that just slots in and snaps into place, and nice and easily. And then of course the film back. But I just wanted to show you something which I think is kind of cool, that I noticed as I was sort of prodding and poking and doing little bits and pieces. So this particular Minox has a program auto exposure mode, and that selects the aperture and shutter speed for you accordingly. However, it doesn't select the aperture as you would manually select the aperture. It doesn't close the aperture blades. In lieu of closing the two aperture blades, it actually opens the shutter a given amount according to the aperture that you require. And I'm going to fire this shutter now and hopefully demonstrate what I mean by that. So fingers crossed that this is actually visible. Now hopefully you saw that. I'm just going to cock the shutter again. And it's a short throw cocking lever, requires 2 pulls. And I'm just going to fire that again. There you go. And just for comparison's sake, this is what the actual aperture assembly looks like when this is set. This is currently set to F8. So you can see the difference in the shape there. And before I finish this video and package that up and go and load a film to test this camera, I just want to show you this really, really cool little tripod. This is actually a Minox tripod and was sold as one of the accessories for the sub-miniature range, the little spy cameras, often mistakenly called James Bond spy cameras. Interesting fun fact, the Minox sub-miniature camera was never used in any of the James Bond books, wasn't even actually designed as a spy camera in the first instance, and was only ever used in one of the James Bond films by arguably the worst screen James Bond ever, George Lazenby, who used a Minox bee to take photographs of the brainwashed girls at Blofeld's Swiss lair, and he used it incorrectly, held it upside down with his finger nowhere near the shutter button. Just a bit of fun trivia for you there, but there you go. So anyway, this tripod is amazing. It's a little tabletop tripod. It's got a ball swivel head. It can move all over the place. It's got a shutter release cable. But the best thing about it is it packs down into something the size of just slightly larger than a pen, and I will show you that. So here's the tripod, and it's in its unfolded and operable state. So the thinnest of the 3 legs, you've got your cable release, which slides into there, and it's got a little thread on the plunger button. Push that in and twist it like so. Unscrew the entire leg like so. Goes into the middle one, the second thinnest. These two are noticeable for the fact that they are smooth chromed, and the main one is actually textured, because this also is the lock for the ball head. Unscrew the second one like so, slide it into the third and screw that in, and then if you untighten the textured leg, this allows the actual ball head to swivel. So for storage purposes, you would put this in an upright position. For the sub-miniature cameras, a little cage is supplied with these, which screws onto the mount, and it has a locking pin, which emulates the locking pin of the measuring chain, and you can lock the camera into place so that it doesn't fall out when you turn it in various places. And that is an entire Minox tripod. How cool is that? That is the stuff of James Bond films. So here in front of us we have the first test roll out of the camera, and as you can see it looks pretty good. This was some old bolt roll HP5 that I've had for ages, which tends to be my go-to test film for any new camera I need to run a test on. And as you can see, as we get right the way up the roll, we've got one shot missing. So there's one where the shutter didn't fire, which was the third in the roll. So obviously we missed a bit, one there because of that bit that was exposed to the light. The second one, and then the third one, the shutter didn't fire. But on all of the others it has. So I'm really pleased with that. And if we move back down to that one, although it's incomplete, stop that waving around. Although it's incomplete, I need a better, closer look at that under magnification, but that is wide open at f2.8 at a measured distance of 3 feet, with the focusing ring turned down to 3 feet, and it looks pretty good. Really pleased with that.